Let me show you something. You all walk by this every day. He hasn't changed a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that was 25 years ago, and it's unbelievable. So I won't tell you how old he is.
I will. That was, there's a story, the portrait of Dorian Gray, you know, where the portrait gets older and the individual, the real life person, doesn't. This is portrait of Dorian Gray in reverse. You can see.
So we're honored to have Bob with us today. Some of you know Bob. In fact, Bob brought a photo. This is an old, by the way, for the younger folks, this is Bob's version of a panoramic photo. He now does this with his iPhone, but back then he had to take individual pictures and then piece them together. But this was a morning meeting back probably 1988.
No, what is it? 88.
88, the year I was graduating from high school. There are some.
The year that a lot of us were born.
It's even scarier. There are a few people in this room: George Archie, Don Rybert, Terry Wright, Tom Walton, and
Terry. You mentioned Terry.
George. Yeah. So there's a few that you'll want to come up and see what they look like back before you were born, Maddie. But I'm going to shut up.
Krista, you're in there.
That's right, Chris. We'll find you.
I usually hide
We're honored to have Bob here today, and he's got some great stories to tell you. Dan's going to moderate because Bob would be here all day if we let him. And we've got work to do. We have clients that we need to bill, and we need to do that. You know how that works.
Yes, yeah.
So we're honored to have Bob here today. We're going to open it up, and then at the end, I think we're going to have some time for questions.
Right.
Feel free to engage with Bob. He may even hang around later, a little bit later, if you can. Maybe after the meeting, if anyone wants to come up and chat a little bit, you're welcome to do that. So, welcome, Bob. Thanks for coming in to speak.
Thank you, Todd.
You want to start off? You want to start off with an opening statement?
Opening statement. Todd said he would stay for a few minutes, but I think he's already gone. I'd like to thank each of you for being here, and especially I'd like to tell you how nervous I am. This is the last major presentation I made was last September on my 80th birthday to my 4 grandkids. And I wasn't near as nervous then as I am today. It's interesting when I think of my last 20 years of being totally, absolutely, completely retired. I did a cold turkey retirement, which says no marketing, no advertising, don't try to keep up with it. You barely kept up with it while you were there, don't try it in retirement. So I do appreciate you coming. I do know that I wouldn't be here had Krista not held up her hand and said, what about that old guy that used to? So I thank you. I got the word from Bob Lauder, and it blew me away because 20 years is a long time. And so to come back in and talk about the olden days is a real challenge, because what can you remember over, when you take, I started with the agency in March of 1960, before any of you all were born. And I retired in '93. So I had 33 years. In the last 20 years, I had Todd's job, and I loved it. I would go to parties and pretend like I was having a good time, but I was always thinking about what I was supposed to be doing right now or tomorrow, the presentation next week that we were trying to make, some client that might not be totally happy because of our lack of big ideas, all those things. So you can imagine, after 20 years of operating that way, and for the years before, retirement wasn't a bad deal.
Bob, talk about that agency in 1960 when you first got to Doe-Anderson. Tell us a little bit about what it was like then. I was
right out of college, I went to work for General Electric with their advertising training program in Schenectady, New York. Back then, there were not advertising programs, curricula at the colleges. Missouri had a great journalism school, as they do now. So the training program at GE or any other major corporation was good. What they do is put you on a job during the day, and you would go to class 5 to 7, 9 months a year. You'd be graded on those. Your next assignment was based on how well you did. So I was with them for 6 years, and a fellow I had worked with GE came to work in '58, Lou Snyder, for Doe-Anderson. And they needed another person because the state or the agency had picked up the business, the industrial development business for the state of Kentucky. And they needed a writer, and that's what I did. So I flew down, got the job, and came to work March of 1960. The first words I got from Anderson of Doe-Anderson, he called all the younger guys kiddo. Well, when you're the 27-year-older, you think you've gotten beyond the kiddo status, but everybody was kiddo, so we kind of got used to that. He said, because he had a good big boy voice, and he said, kiddo, somebody is going to ask you how old you are. I know you're just 27. Tell them you're 30. Right off the bat, I'm advised to not give it. So I was never asked that, so I didn't have to do it. I often wondered what I would have done had I done it. When I came in, my first day at the office, I remember vividly, people would come in with their coffee cup. Early in the morning, they put me in this little cubbyhole area, and finally, about the sixth person, I was number 16 employee, and finally somebody said, "Oh, this isn't the coffee room anymore." So I was put where the coffee pot was, and I kind of knew where my status was from that point. The agency then was mostly handling trade and industrial, Sealy Cook, valves and fittings, Schuler Axle Company, the Fetzer Broadcasting Company, which had 6 or 7 radio stations and later television stations. That was the kind of business we were doing. We were not visible to anybody except the employees and clients, a few clients. We were buried in the Commonwealth Building. Buried because you got off the elevator. It's at 4th and Broadway. It used to be at 4th and Broadway. There's another story which we don't have time for. I'll make time. I had long since been retired, and news was big. We came home from Destin, I think, where we had a condo. We came home for a few days. I guess it was during the holidays. I know it was, and the word was they're going to implode the Commonwealth Building on a certain date. We were scheduled to go back on a Saturday, back down to Destin, to our condo. And I talked to Ann, my wife of now almost 59 years. I said, I've got to see it on TV. I don't want to go down there. It's too cold, but I want to see it. So they had TV and everything set up, and we watched it, and there goes my office, you know, of all those years. And so what happened is that night, one hellacious snowstorm came along. It closed all the interstates going through Kentucky, and we had to stay through that when we thought we were going to be in sunny Florida. So I don't think Ann has ever forgiven me for that one. Early Doe-Anderson, I'm finished on that.
Okay, well, I just was going to ask you to expound a little bit about those early days at the agency. And one thing that I find interesting from some of what I've read in your previous works and the conversation that you all had transcribed back on the 50th anniversary was that you didn't have copywriters necessarily back in those days. There wasn't what we would call a creative department.
We had an art department and an account department. All the account guys called them clients during the day, spent half the night writing or working with the art directors that wondered, why have you got to meet with me at 6:30 tonight? You know, because we were both copy contact, and it was called copy contact back then. And that's the way it lasted until a point where I went to Barker. I was one of the copy contact guys. Excuse me. And I said, Larry, take part of my salary, whatever it takes, we've got to hire a full-time writer, nothing but writing. And that's when Bob Beggs was hired. And he was probably as talented a creative guy as I ever worked around. But he came in, by then I had gotten out of the coffee pot room. I had a decent office, but we brought a desk in, and so Beggs and I shared an office for the first year. And what a difference it made to have a real legitimate full-time creative person. But they were still working directly. A meeting on a project would involve the account manager, Beggs, and an art director. That's the way it was. We were, all the things you do today, I'm sure, the tools you use are so different. I never will forget the time I came back into the agency to visit some friends in the art department. And when I left in '93, there were the big drawing boards at the 45-degree angle. And when I came back in, what we had, people sitting in darkened rooms with their computer. Oh, God bless you, thank you. And it blew my mind when I saw the tools, how they, I'm fine, thank you. It blew my mind, the tools have changed. The one thing that will never change is what's important between you and our client. And that's the only thing we've got to worry about, is providing better ideas than they ever expect, and to provide them long before they ever expect them.
Tell us a little bit about some of the early leadership of the agency. I know you didn't know Mr. Doe, but you certainly heard a lot of stories about him, but you did know Warwick Anderson.
Yeah, really. Interesting, because I was the fourth leader in the agency, which, as you all know, started in 1915. Incidentally, it started, the first office building, you may have seen in that history book, it started at the corner of 5th and Main. And that's right where the Center for the Arts is, right on that corner now. Elmer Doe, I was interested in the history of the place from the time I got here, and I kept asking all the people. I didn't ask Warwick Anderson because I figured that was off limits, but I would ask people that worked directly with him, what was he like? Elmer Doe came, he was the copy chief at J. Walter Thompson. Colonel Thompson took him to London to start an office for J. Walter Thompson in London. I mean, this is pre-1915. So this guy had to be talented. All the stories I picked up on Elmer Doe is that he was not an easy man to know. He was a very quiet kind of guy. Bad eyesight, so therefore he'd walk down the hall and probably not even speak to you. He was an introspective kind of guy that just didn't want to interact with the employees. Sounds appealing, doesn't it? and so he was so dedicated to great copy and so talented a craftsman with words. When we were moving from the Commonwealth Building to 223 East Broadway, somewhere back in the storeroom, there were 6 big, I mean oversized albums full of the early days, the early 20s of his ads, Louisville Cement, Cherokee Gardens, places that were just coming. And we looked at, we were trying to skinny down all the stuff. We moved to 223 East Broadway then. And what I found, these big, tall trash cans, somebody had dumped all 6 scrapbooks in there. So I dug them out and preserved them. The historian in me said, God, these are too great to lose. Eventually, before I left, because I figured no one cared about the history of the place as much as I did. You know, that's ego-oriented, I'm sure, but I really felt that way. Nobody was worried about the history, writing down the history as much as I was. So I went out to the University of Louisville to the archives, showed them what we had, and I said, would you all take these, put them in these humidity control rooms and give access to the agency anytime to look at them. So that's, I doubt if they've ever been looked at, but they are there. And on the 100th anniversary, somebody may want to look at them. And to you all, 100th anniversary seems a long way away. For me, at age 80, I'm thinking, will I make it? And so that's what you always, you know, those are the kind of thoughts that pop in. Now, you're up, Dan.
Tell us about Mr. Anderson. He got fired a number of times, apparently, right?
Yes. And I didn't know that until we put that big Wallensack recorder on the table. And we had a series of meetings where we recorded from those people who were there and worked for Doe, what were your impressions of Elmer Doe? And then Warwick Anderson had his impressions, and they're all spelled out in that. Warwick Anderson could charm the birds out of the trees. He was, and could be, the entertainment of the group, but he always told you exactly how he felt. He was probably my father's age, so I loved my dad and was never frightened by him, but Warwick Anderson, if he took a unliking to you, you could be in trouble. So we walked gently and gingerly. We had a morning meeting every morning, and I remember when somebody showed something and we were saying, you ought to do this, 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 this. Warwick Anderson said, I think it's just awful. And several of us disagreed with him, and he said, gentlemen, this is the last morning meeting I'm coming to. So, you know, those were not always sweet, wonderful, kissy type times. And we thought, oh man, are we all gone? So Warwick Anderson, I remember 4 of us had a meeting at the Blue Boar one time over a cup of soup or a sandwich. And our mission was to figure out how to approach Warwick Anderson to buy for the agency spring forth for a Kodak carousel projector.
High tech.
Does that spell out the times in which I live? I remember when I walked in, I was assigned a piece of copy and I started writing it out. I was typing it out because I was a good typist, and I still am. And he came in, kiddo, what are you doing? And I said, well, Mr. Anderson, I'm just... And so he said, no more of that. He said, you want me to take the typewriter away, or will you promise me you'll dictate all your letters, dictate your copy? Dictate. I mean, I don't know where the hell I'm going, and I'm supposed to dictate this. You know how when you're writing a piece of copy or writing a letter, you want that first paragraph to be perfect. You really want it to be great. And so He said, look here, kiddo, here's the deal. You'll spend an hour on that first paragraph of copy when what you really want to do is get the entire thought down and then go back and massage that first paragraph after you've gotten the whole thing. We all were good at dictating after a while. We dictated letters, we dictated our advertising copy. This will take you back though, you won't even you've seen in the museums these wax cylinders. They're about this long and about that big around. They're wax cylinders. Well, the wax cylinders, called an editophone, I think, you would put them on this thing, lower the bar down on it, and you talk into this thing like that when you dictate your copy. And then you would carefully, or dictate all your letters. You had 16 letters. You remember you're dealing off the top of the stack and you're dealing with what we got to do, a memo to so-and-so, do this, do that, you know. And so then you would carefully take that wax cylinder out to, back then they were called secretaries. And we would hand this to a secretary, and sometime occasionally, like once a month, there was a slip. And when that wax cylinder hit the floor, it shattered into pieces. And the poor secretaries, I can name them all, they hated those wax cylinders because they had to shave those after the letters were taken off. We had one wet copier in the agency, and Warwick Anderson didn't trust the kiddos to operate the wet copier. I'm making all these people lovable, aren't I? And so we'd go back to Jack Peterkin, and Jack Peterkin, I'd say, Jack, could you make me, I'm busy now, Bob. And I say, oh, do you think you could make a copy sometime soon? And he'd say, I'll try to get to it. So that went on, you know, for a year. And finally they came out with quicker copies, but nothing like you've got now. Enough of that.
I want to talk to you about some of the other leadership, but before we kind of get off the 1960s, though, a lot of us will sit around and watch Mad Men these days, which of course is about a big whoop-de-doo New York agency, which maybe Doe-Anderson wasn't at the time, but tell us about just the culture and...
You think it is now?
I'm just going to ask you about what you think about, is Mad Men kind of like what it was like to Doe-Anderson in the 1960s?
Sue Grafton is a real good friend of ours, and when she learned that I was not watching Mad Men, she gave me the whole set the first year. And I watched it, and what I realized is that some of my buddies at GE went to New York. Some of my buddies at GE fit right in with what was going on in New York. All the young people I've talked to in years since, I've urged, including Uncle Dave, to go Chicago and not go New York. New York is a different culture, and nothing bad, nothing wrong, except the morals are looser. I've got two friends, two of my bosses at GE that went down there and formed a very successful agency. Great things come out of there. But that culture, I knew it existed, and it's probably very accurate as to what was happening in there.
But what about Louisville? What's different about what the culture was at Doe-Anderson in those days?
We would take, I remember I had clients at American Air Filter, and we would, another trade account, and we would go to lunch once a month, take them to lunch, a couple of our clients, and you would just block out the afternoon because the clients were there for heavy drinking. And it was not part of what I was used to or possibly could even handle, but you knew that you just had to be there. I think the world has changed a lot. And I think that those kinds of situations, y'all can tell me, it's changed for the better because people are more dedicated to getting it done, perhaps, than they were then. I can't really relate. I can't add anything to that.
Okay. Well, then tell us a little bit then about Larry Barker. I know that was he was the guy who preceded you as president. I know you all were very close.
Larry described himself. He came from a small agency in Arkansas, and he one time told a group of us, we were asking about the agency he worked with, and he said it so well I've never forgotten. He said, "Well, I was the number 2 man in a one-man agency." He joined Doe-Anderson, and what Larry loved to do, to me, he is, if there was a patron saint of Doe-Anderson's past and future and success, it would be Larry Barker. Larry hated being president. He didn't like, Larry would have panicked, and I near panicked when Bob called that I'm doing this. Larry would have refused because he did not like large groups. Larry's love was learning, the written word. He loved to craft advertising copy. He was just his total dedication was to fairness. Right, George? Fairness. Fairness was everything to him. He didn't care who it was. It had to be done fairly. And he often would, his joy was sitting with his pipe and his typewriter. He never would have smoothly gone into the computer age. I remember when I thought that we ought to have a computer, and I knew that nobody wanted it, but if the president of the agency put one at his desk for more than, we had him in the accounting department. We had a big NCR machine, and then that's a whole nother story about how we got there. But Barker, to stay on Barker, he absolutely loved to sit at his typewriter with his pipe and type good advertising copy. And occasionally he would meet directly with the clients. And I'll touch on that when I talk about some of our clients that we got in the 70s. But Barker just did not like the thought of managing people. He liked managing himself. He liked working with words. He liked working with very small groups of people. And the idea of running an ad agency was just something he didn't want to do. So one day, I was down in Tennessee going after some new business, and I called in to make sure everything, anything I ought to know. Yeah, there's a meeting tomorrow morning, and you need to get back tonight. So I was driving, so I drove back, came in, and I turned to Lou Snyder, my senior account guy, and I said, "Lou, what the hell is going on here? What's this emergency meeting?" He said, "I have no idea." And it turns out Barker submitted his resignation. He and Lou Snyder were not getting along that well. And most of us, if you've got a battle, you want to win it if you think you're right. Barker did not enjoy battles, and he thought the way to settle the thing is just resign. So I went to Larry and I said, "What in the world are you doing?" I said, "I'm a happy account guy, and all these other guys are," "Well, no, not all the way, and I'm tired of battling." He said, "I'm leaving the agency." And I said, "What are you going to do?" And he said, "I don't have any idea. Maybe I can get a job at the Courier or something." And so I was blown away. And so he said, "All of you who are trying to talk me out of this are really insulting me. I've thought about this for a long time, and I'm going to retire. Leave the agency, resign. Whew, that's big. So he said, the board has got to come together and elect a president. And so during the next day or so, I went to him, and he said, I said, what should I do? And he said, these are his words, for God's sakes, Allison, this isn't a third grade president's election. This is for the running of the agency. Vote for the person you think can run it best. Well, you still wonder who can, because Barker was my hero. So I ended up being elected president, and Lou Snyder immediately announced he was going to leave. Fun times, you know. And so I went to Barker. I said, you know, you set all this in motion. What in the world are you doing? I'd rather just be an account guy and let you keep being president. Lou's going, and so your battle there is over. He said, no, I'm not going to be president. I said, will you stay if Lou goes? Because Lou said he's going. So he said, if Lou goes, I will. So he stayed till he died in '81, and that was '73 when all that fiasco happened.
So let's talk about the 70s, because that really was a period when you mentioned early on that Doe-Anderson, nobody really knew about Doe-Anderson in its early days, except maybe a few clients. But in the 70s, things kind of started getting a little bit more high profile.
You know, I don't know whether it was us or a physical facility. We were outgrowing that Commonwealth building. Nobody knew we were. So we started, Barker asked me to start looking for a place along with Lou. And that was '72. We found this Burdorf furniture gallery, which had been the old Vogt Mansion on Broadway, 223, kind of a landmark location. And we looked at places. I drove by 2 of them on the way here this morning that we shook our head no to. But that Burdorf building looked so good. And how do you buy that? Well, we came up with the idea, let's use our profit sharing plan and let's buy the building out of that, which we did. And so we promised a return of so much to the people of the agency who owned the profit sharing plan, who were involved in that, and it worked well. What that gave us is incredible, and I've got some pictures which I'll show when I finish. Oh, I'm already finished? Ann told me this morning, said, please ask Dan to do what I always do. And I said, oh, I know what you mean. If I get, you know, a small group of people, if I'm telling a story and I think I'm halfway through and she thinks I should be finished, she'll go. So after nearly 59 years, I know when that signal comes, in mid-sentence, please, stop. So at any rate, we bought the old Burdorf building, the old Vogt Mansion, and we suddenly were very visible. We did things to that building. I was in charge of it, but we hired a young architect, Bill Martin, and they did things to that building that made us spectacular. When clients came in, they were agog at what they were seeing. Rather than being buried in the Commonwealth building, we had a spectacular place to live. We were so proud of it. So I think it boosted our ego, and it made us much more visible to anybody that would come. I got a call, we'd probably been in the building 6 months. I got a call from Mr. Bill Samuels. That's not my age Billy, younger than I am. That's not Rob, but that, oh, excuse me, I'm not supposed to touch it. But this is Daddy Billy, Daddy T.W. Samuels, who in 1954 bought this little place down at Loretta, Kentucky, and started a distillery. So in '72, I got a phone call one day, I was not president, and said, Mr. Samuels was a man of few words. He was an engineer. I mean, you counted those words. You listened carefully. You looked at his face to see what he was telling you because he didn't use a lot of words like I do. And he said, Bob, wonder if you'd come down and have lunch with me down in Bardstown. We'll meet at my office here, and then we'll go down to Loretta. I want to show you the distillery. We were working for some small brands at Old Fitzgerald. Not the big brand, but small brands like Rebel Yell and Weller. And so I said, wow, yes, sir, we'll be there when you saw. And I figured Barker was handling those brands for Stutzel Weller. And in fact, we had helped engineer put the ad manager in, Dick Parrish, who happened to be my office mate in Schenectady, New York. He was in there as the advertising manager at Old Fitzgerald. So I went down there and had lunch. I took Barker because he knew whiskey and I didn't. And so we went down and did a full tour, and Mr. Samuels has taken us around and showing us things, and introduced us to Sam Cecil, who was the first distiller, and gave us some history. And at the end of the day, my goal was to not screw up and to get an opportunity to make a presentation to get the business. So he hands to Larry and to me a bottle of Makers. Historian said, Mr. Samuels, would you sign and date that? And Barker said, oh yeah, would you sign? Because Larry was. In fact, I got the bottle and I treasured that. Another story there. And so he then said, I want Doe-Anderson to handle our account. When you go in and your full mission is to get an opportunity to make a presentation, that kind of screws it up, you know. So I didn't want to argue with him, and so I was blown away. And from that day forward, son Billy, who's now, you know, in semi-emeritus, I'm full emeritus, he's semi-emeritus, right? And so Billy wasn't even with the company then. It was Daddy. And there were points along the way. Daddy truly didn't say much. He was very serious. He liked Doe-Anderson. He liked our work right from the start. And somewhere along the way, Billy came in and transitioned into what I would determine, what I would say, and I've said over and over again the past 20 years, Bill Samuels, my age and a few years younger, is the smartest, most brilliant marketing man I've ever worked with around, had as a client, just absolutely. He would roll into the agency at 6:30 at night, and he'd say, where's my Makers team? And from the agency over on 223 East Broadway, they would come together. I'll stop.
That's good. Let's keep talking about some of those days back in the 70s when you did get indeed a lot of other national level accounts, and that really is when things seem to start taking off for Doe-Anderson.
We realized we were not just Louisville and environs oriented. We set as a target what we labeled as the soft underbelly of the big agencies. What is their soft underbelly? They like convenience at flying into a major airport, taking a cab or a car right to the headquarters of the place, and leaving. We picked out a number of clients that didn't have nearby airports. We'd have to rent a plane out at Bowman and fly into there. And we picked up a lot of business. That North American Van Lines was one of the most exciting accounts because we did work, Beggs did work that was just incredible. We won every creative award for TV and radio thanks to what Beggs had written. They handled they North American. When we first started working with them, they said, too bad you weren't here last year. We were the authorized mover of the King Tut Museum. Nobody's old enough to remember the King Tut Museum, but all the great treasures of the king, King Tut from Egypt, came over here and were exhibited in locations, not all, but in the major museums across the U.S. And so they said, too bad you weren't here last year, because we had a confidentiality agreement where we wouldn't tell anybody what we were doing for security sakes. And so we said, but you did it, you did it, you did it. You carried the treasures of a king. Beggs wrote copy about this wonderful piano that had been in the family for years, and how people needed to move it from grandma's house to granddaughter's house. And it was all so well done because it was the treasures. You know, if she would trust this piano, if they would trust the treasures of a king to North American, wouldn't they trust this treasure? It was beautiful, it was wonderful. So those were good times. There was one account we had that no one, after a period of time, wanted to work on. And it was pretty obvious it was not right for us. Batesville Casket Company. I remember going to one of their national sales meetings, and we were with leading undertakers from, talk about a cheery group. And so finally we resigned the account. Enough.
Well, let's talk about cheeriness, because I'll tell you, then the couple of years that we overlapped when I started here and you were still president, one of the things that really marked your tenure, certainly then, and as I understand it throughout your tenure, really is your enthusiasm. You would do little soft shoe down the hallway. You'd be whistling at the copier machine and those kinds of things. You're looking at family friends who can tell those stories as well. George and I were good. Well, talk about how you keep that kind of an attitude, because sometimes in the business these days, and I'm sure back in those days, you don't necessarily feel like being all that cheery every day. But how do you do that, and what does that do to the culture of the place?
I grew up in a happy household. I had a mother and dad that were happy folks. I had a brother that was a happy guy. I always used to worry that if I had a flat tire on the way to work and was all out of sorts as I walked through, and people would say, oh God, we're coming apart as an agency. They didn't know I just had a flat tire, and I got my suit all messed up and everything changed in the tire and all that. So we tried to communicate. I'm not dealing with your question at all. I don't know how to deal with that. My son is my baby child, and this October, he will be 50 years old. And our daughter, 7 years older, is as old as we are now. So our daughter lives down in Florida. She's in charge of computer technology for the Orange County, that's the Orlando public school system. She's deep into computers, so she's the one I call when I have an Apple problem. I've been Apple since 1989. That's all I've ever worked with, and I love Apple products. So she's down there with our oldest grandchild, who's a freshman in college. And so our second grandchild graduated from St. X, and we did the big graduation thing this past Sunday. And then we all went to eat. And I said to son Rob, who reads me like a book, I said, I'm really uptight over this thing they've asked me to do at the agency. He said, Dad, you got only one problem to worry about. Tell me, son. Talking too much.
Okay, so you're done with that then. Okay, all right. Well, then let me ask you about management decisions, because I know that sitting in the president's chair is a tough thing to do. And tell me about your best management decisions.
I told one, we spent the winter down in Florida, and there were 2 or 3 of us at a little gathering. We were having dinner and went around the table, and everybody was talking about that kind of thing. And I scraped up 2 that I recalled, 2 major management decisions. And even those of you who happened to be around when I was here might not know about these. So the first one was, we were at 223 East Broadway. There were 3 buildings. The main one that you see that the hospital has taken over and they've ruined it. Truly, I've been through there. They've ruined it. And then there was the carriage house out back, which we used to rent out to a furniture designer, and then we took it over when we needed that space back there. And then there was the parish house belonging to the big church. And for money's sake, they decided to rent that out to us. So we had 3 buildings. The beauty of that relationship with the church, the rector, was that they had a gym, pristine little gym that was probably built before World War II and had hardly ever been used. So a number of us loved to play basketball as often as we could. So we agreed to ask the church, the rector, if we could use that gym. And they said, sure, sure, sure. So for years, every Wednesday night, a group of us would go over and we'd play pickup games, and we had a ball. We'd even play our clients. I remember H&B. The thrill of my life was the time that we played H&B, and a guy that I hadn't seen the movie yet, 42, Jackie Robinson, Pee Wee Reese, was playing for, and I was guarding him. And it was such a thrill. And afterwards, we'd all come together in a conference room, and we'd have a beer together.
Is this getting to some of your best management decisions? I'm just checking.
My son was right. The best management decision, thank you for getting me. It came when I got a call from the rector. Yes, sir? Yes, sir. I'd never met the man personally. I'd talked to him. Mr. Allison? Yes, sir. Our committee, parish committee, met last night, and it has been decided that we're taking a real big chance having you all play in our gym every Wednesday night. And so therefore, I think last Wednesday was the last night, because we had to go over and we get a key each time to go in there. So God occasionally comes forth, you know, the hand in the creation touches. So I guess I lifted my hand and I thought, this is big for us, is playing in the gym. This will ruin our whole agency if we don't get to play. And so God inspired me. And I said, you mean we can't use the gym anymore? Yeah, that's what it means, Mr. Allison. And I said, well, you know, that dawned on me. I never would have thought of it, but you bring up a good point. All your parishioners park in our parking lot every Sunday. I said, we've got a chain, I think, for we can put a cross on Saturday night. Because, you know, the liability of having your people's cars there. And he said, maybe I ought to get back to you on this thing. Why don't you all plan on continuing playing until? The second one, I cleared this with my wife. The second management decision I'm most proud of. This is when God just grabbed me and hugged me and told me what to say. We were in the parish house, And more women worked on the second floor, and there was a restroom there. More men happened to be on the first floor just by chance. So we said, that's the men's room. Upstairs is the women's room. And so one day, one of our longtime employees who preceded me at the agency came in, and wow, was he mad. He was furious. He said, I'm leaving. And I said, for God's sakes, what is wrong? He said, every time I'm in the men's room here on the first floor, without even a knock, one of the women comes storming in. I know she's got 2 sons, but she just comes in. I mean, she waits till the last minute, vroom. And I said, you're going to leave over this? I can't stand it. I'm leaving. And I said, this is when God said, here's what you do. I said, Tim, forget that. I said, I've got an idea. He said, what's that? I think she'll continue doing that until we come up with some kind of cure. She's got 2 young sons. Some people in this room may have raised young boys. I said, after you finish your duty and wash your hands, don't dry them. Let the potty seat down and sprinkle the potty seat. Anyone who's had brothers or little kids know he came back a week later and said, I hadn't seen her. And a month later, I hadn't seen her. So I saved the resignation of an employee. Okay, we've done all damage I can do.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we have just a few minutes left. I do want to open it up if some folks have got some questions out there. But I kind of want to ask you, out of all the history and all the wisdom that you've seen in the industry over all these years, what do you think is the most pertinent thing for the Doe-Anderson employees of today?
2 things come to mind. One of the things that I used to try to do every time a new person came in, and I may have made this speech to several of you here, was to make sure they knew how important they were to the agency. I meant this sincerely, and I would say, you are going to change this place. We've learned enough about you to where we are confident you're going to make us better than we are right now. But that depends upon us making sure you're doing the things you like to do. You might find we're asking you to do things. I grew up in my daddy's service station business, and I knew that some cars got 4 miles to the gallon, some got 8, some got 10, some got 25 or 30 or whatever. I said, some jobs you give me, I got to tell you, I start breaking out with sweat as soon as you give it to me, because I know it's a 4 miles to the gallon kind of project. I'll take far too long. We would like to make sure any project that you're asked to do, that doesn't mean they're all easy, but make sure you're in a job where you are totally comfortable. And if after you get here you find that's not the case, please let your manager know, because you're going to be unhappy unless you're doing something that you enjoy doing. And I can tell by all the smiles you're all doing that. I think the big thing, I wrote a memo when I had been president for 5 weeks. And there it is in this book on words I've saved. That's what we're all about, ideas. And that's, as long as we're simply doing the ads, and this relates to the era I was in, doing the ads, the mailers, the brochures that our clients expect us to handle, we're only doing part of the job. No matter how well we're doing those things, we must serve as the source of ideas for our clients. Big ideas, little ideas, lots of ideas, unexpected ideas, unsolicited ideas. ideas they can't afford but they want. Blue sky ideas, good ideas. Ideas then and now. Ideas are our future. They demonstrate more than all else that we're thinking about our client's business, his welfare. They secure our welfare. Ask yourself how many unsolicited ideas you've suggested or passed along lately. I brought along, only for those who don't have to really rush, this morning meeting deal, which is what the agency looked at. But we used to have what we call our new business cards. Shows you how times change. Is Mike Lippman? No, okay, they all left, those that knew me. So we've got pictures that some of you all will find interesting, just flop them over, of our morning meetings way back then. And you'll find people you've heard stories about, agency management back then, and all of these cards. So anybody wants to look at these things, don't worry about the order. You can look at those things. What have I done in retirement? I have, as I mentioned earlier, cold turkey forgotten about this business. So this whole exercise of trying to remember something to say to you all has been good for me. I have really enjoyed being with each of you all, and I appreciate your patience with me. Thank you.
So just a couple of questions maybe from out here.
Yes.
Yeah.
You said that Bill Sr. called you. How did you guys know each other?
I'm sorry, how did
you know?
Oh, Bill Sr. I had been to a couple of functions at a club, and Warwick Anderson introduced me to him. We were in Lexington, and he said, let's have dinner together. And Ms. Samuels and Mr. Samuels, Warwick Anderson, and myself, the four of us had dinner one night over there. And I wasn't even sure he would ever remember, but he did, and he called. So, you know, you never know when you're making a good or a bad impression.
Is there anybody else? Okay. Yes.
Was today as bad as you thought it would be?
Well, that's a good question. When I go home, I will realize all the things I wanted to say I forgot to say.
You have another chance next week, right?
That's right.
There won't be anybody here next week because word will spread.
Figure out how we can come again.
Yeah, I'll sit at the end of the table and eat a piece of pizza, hoping somebody will come. Got another question?
What was the most challenging client experience you had to deal with while you were here?
The most challenging.
Yeah, I got it, but I don't. I remember when we were working, this is not the most challenging, it was just one of those little dink deals that turned out to be big. We had a client that every time we presented the program, and it was the Paul Simonon Company, every time we presented, Mr. Simonon, what a wonderful man. He would say, boy, I love those ideas. I think they are just great. But the number two at the company always found fault with whatever we did. And it made every presentation after the first 8 or 10 months miserable. So we decided that with the next presentation, we'd see what number two guy did. Number two guy did exactly what number two guy always did. So right there in front of Mr. Simonon, we said, you know, the chemistry between a company and its client, an agency and its client, is so critical. And we just don't feel it's right here. Pretty obvious why. And what we'd like to do is give to you all the ideas we've presented today. We'd like for you to have those free. And what we'd like to do today is resign the business and help you find, if you want us to, help you find a good agency, so where the chemistry would be right. So that was not a fun thing to do, but it was something that needed to be done.
Okay, I think Maddie, you got a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know what interested you in this industry when you were...
I majored in industrial management in college. A lot of engineering courses and a lot of, but I was editor of the annual when I liked graphics. I enjoyed that. And so when I always loved to spend time in what we call the art department or creative department. I love to watch how things were put together graphically, how it all came together. I was never talented to do that, but that's why 5 years after I retired, I took a beginning Elder Hostel 40-hour course in watercoloring, beginning watercoloring. So I've been doing it for the last 15 years.
Excellent.
And then I took a course in stone sculpture. Got a big chunk of alabaster, and I brought some pictures of some of the things I've done. Got all afternoon, gang?
Well, we'll do one more question. I think, Rachel, you
Does someone else have one?
I was
I was just going to say, what? Go ahead. You were such an enthusiastic leader. How did that trickle down throughout the agency, or how did that spread around?
You know, we all are who we are, and you don't know why you are who you are. And not everybody is enthusiastic, and that's good because they're being themselves. And you can't ask people to be enthusiastic just for that, you know, to be enthusiastic. So I don't know how it trickled down or whether it trickled down. I don't know. That's a good question. I wish I were smarter and could answer that.
I was just going to ask, what would your biggest accomplishment be? Do you think it was...
Surviving. I never dreamed that I would be president of an agency. I was shocked when it happened, and I struggled. The guy that resigned right away went to the editor of the business page in the Louisville Times and gave him 5 reasons why Allison would fail within the first year. And it took the entire top section of the business section. And so nobody that I knew, none of my neighbors wanted to say congratulations because they knew I wouldn't be there very long. So I guess life is trying to pretend like you're enthusiastic, but desperately trying to survive. And I was thrilled. I never dreamed. I took up running after I'd been with the agency for a while because we all, if we don't watch ourselves, we tend to be desk-bound. My wife says Bob's philosophy is anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And so I started running, you know, 1 mile a day and then 2 miles a day, and then I started running 10Ks. And then I saw little old decrepit people running 10Ks, and I thought, I got to do something else. So I ran a marathon here in town, the 26.2, and then the next year, I was in my late 40s then, and the next year I ran another marathon. And so Ann, of course, said, oh, Bob's he ran a marathon. And so somebody came up to me and said, did you run a marathon? And said, where did you run? And I said, I ran the marathon here in Louisville. Oh, how far was that? So I was determined I was going to run New York. So I guess I was 52, 53, somewhere in there, and I ran New York. But I did all of that, number one, because this was before, my son sells orthopedic devices, sells artificial joints for Johnson & Johnson DePuy. So I didn't need one, but I've got an artificial shoulder. I've got an artificial shoulder, I've got an artificial hip, and the knee is not doing well right now. So we're working on all the replaceable joints being done. But I ran to keep my sanity. Maybe that helped me smile more. I never forgot I like to run alone. I never forgot a letter I wanted to dictate. I never forgot the agenda for a meeting I put together while I was running alone. My wife told me it's the first time when all the blood is really working in my head. But I love to run because of my sweet tooth and because I didn't want to be like all those 50-year-olders that died of a heart attack because they were desk-bound. And it's 9 after.
Yep, we are
Sorry.
out of time.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.